They say every old town has a place you're not supposed to go, not marked on any map. No warnings, no signs, just an unspoken rule. Sometimes it's a narrow alley where the air always feels colder. Sometimes it's a house people pretend isn't there, even when it's right in front of you. Locals avoid it, tour guides skip it, even animals cross the street to keep their distance. I used to think those stories were just folklore, little bits of drama to make your vacation photos more interesting. Cursed wells, haunted inns, urban legends passed around to sell postcards and ghost tour. But after that trip, I know better. Some doors aren't closed. They're locked from the inside. Some paths aren't forgotten. They're avoided, on purpose, and silence. Silence isn't just a warning in places like that. It's protection, because once something hears you, once it notices you, it won't forget. I was on a solo vacation in a historic mountain town, the kind of place untouched by time. Stone-paved streets that echoed softly under your steps. Wooden houses with bowed roofs, whispering memories with every gust of wind. Shrines the size of closets, hidden between cracked walls and tangled vines. It was peaceful, quiet, like the town itself was asleep, dreaming of the past and letting you walk through it. I'd always been drawn to places like that, not just for the history, but for what's buried just beneath it, the places guidebooks forget. The corners that feel like they remember something you don't. One afternoon, I took a turn I didn't mean to. A narrow street, too quiet even for that town. The air felt thinner, still, the kind of still that makes you whisper without knowing why. That's when I saw it, a house, wooden, narrow, slightly leaning as if listening. The paint was peeling in strips, stained by time. No signboard, no name, just a small door, slightly ajar. I don't know why I stepped inside, curiosity, maybe. Or something quieter, pulling at the edge of my thoughts. No one stopped me, no one even looked my way. Inside. It was dark, but not abandoned. Every object was placed with care, a chair turned slightly toward the wall, a bowl on the floor as if waiting. Dust floated in narrow beams of light, slow and deliberate. The air was heavy. Colder than outside, not just in temperature, but in presence, like the walls had closed in behind me. I told myself it was just an old house. A hidden treasure for tourists who knew where to look. I took a few photos, my phone clicked too loudly in the silence. Then I left, quickly. I didn't know why I was walking so fast, but I didn't stop. That evening, before heading back to my room, I noticed an old man crouched just outside the lobby, papers fluttering around him in the wind like oversized leaves. No one else paid him any mind. I hesitated, then stepped over and knelt to help. His hands trembled, slow and methodical, but when he looked up, his eyes were unnervingly clear, sharp, like cold glass. He didn't say thank you, didn't even nod. Instead, he stared at me, not with anger, not gratitude, just focus. As if he was trying to recognize something in me or behind me. You took something, he said. Voice dry, heavy, like dust sliding across stone. I blinked. What? He didn't answer, just gave a small shake of his head and waved the words away like smoke. Then he said, calmly, if you ever find yourself lost, follow me. And with that, he stood, slow but deliberate, and walked off into the night without another word. His footsteps made no sound on the old stone. I stood there for a while, not sure why I felt cold. The wind wasn't strong, but something lingered. Like a scent I couldn't name. Back in my hotel room, I plugged in my phone. I should have showered, eaten, slept. But I opened the photos instead, the ones from that strange house. At first, they looked like I remembered. Dim rooms, wooden floors, lacquered furniture too old to touch. But then, in one of them, at the edge of the hallway, there was something standing just beyond the frame of light. Not a shape exactly, a blur, like the image had tried to forget it was there. But I could make out a suggestion, a curve where a shoulder should be, a pale smudge where a face might have been. It was facing me. I know it was. I hadn't seen anything when I took the photo. I know I hadn't, but in that picture, it was staring straight at me. Like it had been there the whole time, waiting. I must have drifted off with the photos still open on my phone. I don't even remember closing my eyes. But when I woke up, I wasn't in my hotel room. I was lying on something stiff, scratchy wool blankets stretched thin over an even stone. The walls were too close, the air stale and heavy, like the inside of something that had been sealed too long. Damp, muffled. There was no window, just a low burning lantern hanging crooked on the far wall, casting weak orange light that barely reached the corners. And then I heard it, not a voice. Not even footsteps, but a sound, crawling. A low, wet hum, shifting, sliding. Like breath dragged across old wood, like dozens of whispers trying to echo in a room too small to contain them. I held my breath, and the sound faded. But when I exhaled, even softly, it surged again. Like it was feeding on it. Every breath, every twitch, a reply. I whispered once, just to test. Hello, the response was immediate. A rush of sound. A sharp tick-tick-tick, like nails on stone. A dragging snarl of air. Something was listening. No, not just listening, waiting. I pressed my lips shut, forcing my breathing through my nose. My heart thundered against my ribs, loud enough I worried it might be heard too. Then, a knock, soft, measured, not demanding, like the sound of someone checking to see if I was still there. I didn't move. Another knock. Then a voice, old, familiar, follow me. I turned my head. There, by the now open doorway, stood the old man I'd helped, holding a small lantern, barely brighter than the one on my wall. His expression was blank, focused, like someone threading a needle underwater. His voice dropped to a whisper. Make no sound. No words, no face. He stepped back, waited. I stood, legs trembling, and followed him out. We entered a narrow corridor, no wider than my outstretched arms, the stones slick and uneven beneath my feet. The air grew colder as we walked, not from wind, but from presence. On both sides, pressed into the black, I could feel them. Pressed flat against the alley walls like burned shadows. So black they looked like holes punched in reality, but with faces, not their own, ours. Some I recognized, strangers I'd seen walking the old town that day, others I prayed I'd never seen before. Each face was wrong, either stretched too wide into frozen grins, or sunken deep with weeping eyes that had no tears, expressions caught mid-scream, mouths opened too wide, but no sound came. Just silence, unbearable, crushing silence. They didn't move, until I stared too long. Some were warped, incomplete, eyes where mouths should be. Smiles stretched just a little too wide, all staring, all waiting for me to slip, to speak, to flinch, to cry. The old man never looked back. His light cut a path just wide enough for me to follow. And I knew if I made a single sound, if I showed the fear boiling under my skin, they'd take me, take my voice, take my face, make me one of them. We kept walking, and I said nothing, not even when one of them leaned close, so close I felt its cold breath on my cheek, and smiled using a face that used to be mine. I was about to cry, but I must keep walking or else that face might be a perfection of mine, silent, deliberate, unchanging. My breath was trapped somewhere between my ribs and throat, refusing to rise too loud. The old man walked ahead, his lantern casting that pale flicker that seemed to strain against the darkness, like it hated where it was. Each flame-wrapped step was a mercy, buying one more second from the things that lined the alley. We passed more of them, more faces, too still, too sharp in detail, like photos burned into charcoal. Not in dozens, maybe about hundreds by now. They weren't just watching anymore. They were leaning in. Some had begun to inch forward, necks stretching like wet cloth, faces dragging toward me as though they smelled something they needed to devour. Others craned upward from the ground like weeds, heads tilted, mouths fixed in open anticipation. I didn't dare look directly at them now. Every time I almost glanced, something moved. A twitch, a jaw opening slightly wider, a smile forming. We passed the same crooked door again, the one nailed shut, wooden slats like teeth. That's when I knew this path wasn't just long, it was looping, changing around us. Once, I'm certain the alley tilted, the cobblestone under my feet rising sideways, as if we were walking up a wall. The old man didn't seem to notice, neither did the lantern. I forced myself not to ask, not to speak, not to think too loud, because now, they were getting closer, not just standing anymore, creeping. One of them dragged a hand along the bricks, leaving no sound, only a faint scrape in my mind, like claws across memory. Another crouched low and opened its mouth as I passed, too wide, and hinged, lips peeling like rotten fruit. It mouthed a word I couldn't hear. My lip almost quivered. Almost, but I bit the inside of my cheek, hard, tasted blood. Held the silence. Behind me, a hand brushed the back of my shirt. Not a grab, not a pull, just recognition. A reminder that it was still there. They were testing me now, probing the edges of my resolve. Like hounds circling a gate, waiting for the lock to rattle. If I slipped, if I blinked too hard, if my breath hitched the wrong way, I'd vanish into this place. Be worn by one of those shadows like a fresh mask. Another face nailed to the wall, forever screaming. Forever silent. We kept walking. The air felt thicker. Like we were wading through syrup made of sorrow. Time had no place here. I couldn't tell if we'd been walking for minutes or days. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to cry and collapse and beg, but all I did was stare at the flickering light. And walk, because it was all I had. That tiny, trembling lantern, and the man who carried it. And whoever waited at the end. I don't know how long we walked. Time dissolved, then the room. We entered through a warped doorway that barely scraped open. It was a kitchen, no windows. No exit but the way we came, just rotted counters. Broken utensils scattered on the ground like bones. And a single, dust-covered table in the center. The old man stepped forward and placed the lantern on it. Its light didn't chase the shadows away, only held them back, like a warning circle drawn in chalk. I stood there, on the edge of the glow, shaking. He turned to me. His eyes were no longer sharp, they were tired, ancient, like they had watched too many people fail. He studied my face, as if checking to see if I was still me. And then he said, gently, almost with sorrow, tomorrow. We finished this. Before I could ask what that meant, before I could break the rule and speak, he stepped close and tapped my forehead with 2 fingers. A flick, just a flick, like someone hitting a candle flame, black. I woke up screaming. Back in my hotel bed, sheets tangled, skin soaked. My mouth was wide open, but no sound came out. It was like the silence had followed me home and stitched itself into my throat. The room was bright with morning light, but it felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Even the birds outside weren't singing. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. The screen flickered, battery still at 40%. The gallery app opened on its own, and there they were. The photos, except the shadows weren't shadows anymore. They had faces now, fully formed, real, and worse, they were all looking at me. No suggestion, no blurs, just dozens of cold, unblinking eyes, locked to the lens, locked to me. Some of them looked like the things in the alley. But others, they looked like people I'd passed in town. Familiar strangers, a child I'd seen playing by a shrine, a street vendor who sold oranges near the train station, even the hotel concierge. I stared, frozen. One photo moved, just a twitch. A subtle shift in the corner of someone's mouth. I dropped the phone. By the time it hit the floor, I'd made my decision. The phone burned quickly in the clay fire pit behind the hotel, its glass face cracking open like a scream. I smashed the SD card and buried the pieces. Deleted backups, every folder, every drive. I didn't care how much I'd lost. Memories weren't worth becoming one. Back inside, I washed my hands 3 times, still didn't feel clean. Later that afternoon, I forced myself out. I needed answers, or at least permission to leave. I found a small tea shop at the edge of the district, one of those old places, carved wood, hanging herbs, and a counter that smelled like incense and old rain. The man behind it had the kind of stillness you don't learn. It's given by age or by loss. I asked him about the house, described it. His smile faded immediately. Hands stilled. That place, he said softly. That's not for visitors. He poured a cup of tea and set it aside, not for me, just to fill the silence. It was a holding house, during the war. They used to keep prisoners there, civilians, dissidents, anyone they didn't want seen. He looked out the window, voice distant. They were locked in, no food, no water, no names, no noise. No noise, I asked before I could stop myself. He nodded slowly. They weren't allowed to speak. The guards said if they heard a voice, even a whisper, they'd take someone out. I didn't ask what that meant. I already knew. He looked at me again. His gaze was careful, measured, They say the last thing to die in that house wasn't a person, it was the sound. It was the screams they never got to make. I shivered. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You walk into that place, and you come out fine. You leave it behind, no problem. He shook his head. No, not unless you bring something back with you. A scrap, a photo, a voice. His eyes darkened. And once you do, they know you. They remember you. My skin crawled. What happens if they find you? I whispered. He didn't answer. He just turned the teacup upside down. I checked out of the hotel that evening, didn't tell anyone, didn't take the main road out of town. I walked until I found a bus with no schedule and no questions. I've never gone back, never looked at photos from that trip again.